I'm joined now by someone who actually started off behind the scenes with the likes of David Suchet before moving into television on series such as Angels, Some Mothers Do Have Them, and eventually working on some of Arthur Miller's classics such as The Crucible and Broken Glass. But along the way, she I suppose inevitably encountered Doctor Who. So I'd like to introduce Assistant Floor Manager Ruth Mayorcas. How are you?
Absolutely fine, thank you.
And you're making the most of these rather odd times?
Yes, because since leaving work, I always did cycle to work, but now cycling is a kind of main thing in my life. So I spend every day on my bike. So for me, it's been, I know for several people it's been really horrid, but I'm lucky I've got a flat with a garden and I bike, so I've been okay. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
But I wanted to take you back to a very different time, 1978, when you encountered Doctor Who as an assistant floor manager. I was wondering if you could explain what an AFM does, or I suppose did.
Okay. Assistant floor manager is a term no longer used really. We're second or third assistant directors. But in those days, you were put onto a production. Your responsibility was doing the calls for rehearsals, helping to run the rehearsal room, doing the props, making sure the props were in the right place, liaising with your designers, costume and makeup on behalf of the director as well as on behalf of the first assistant director. And one of the most difficult things was marking up for rehearsals. And I have got a nice story about that if this is the right time to share it. But so an AFM really was kind of the equivalent of an ASM in theatre, assistant stage manager. So it was props, script, calling the artists, making sure they were there for rehearsals, making sure they got to costume and makeup calls, making notes during rehearsals that you would then pass on. Because of course, in those days we did rehearse. So it wasn't like film where you rehearse on location. Here we would have a good time of rehearsals. And obviously Doctor Who was one of those where you had studio recordings and then film inserts. So the TARDIS was done in the studio and I had to mark the TARDIS up. And for those who don't know, North Acton rehearsal rooms, which is the most fantastic 6-floor block of rehearsal rooms, the floors were marked out in meters. I think it was metric even then, and the designer would give you the plan, and it was quite easy to mark up because you could mark it up on the basis of these squares. And unusually, sometimes you'd have an assistant to help you, and sometimes your floor manager would help you. On this particular occasion, I was doing the markup on a Saturday and a Sunday, and I was given the wooden floor. Now, the wooden floor, the first floor of Television Centre was the dance floor, where all the most fabulous dance shows were rehearsed, every single show that you can imagine. But it was wood, with not a single thing to help you. And the TARDIS was either hexagonal or octagonal, I really can't remember. And I got there and I wept, because I literally couldn't work it out how to do it. And I remember phoning the designer, and he suggested getting a bit of chalk and a handkerchief and kind of putting it there and then going round and kind of working out from that. The production manager, or floor manager as it was then at the time, didn't want to come and help, wasn't going to give up his Saturday and Sunday. So I had to do it on myself and on my own, and it was really, really hard work, I have to say. So that was that. But rehearsals were fantastic, to meet and work with Doctor Who, Tom Baker. That was my Doctor Who, Tom Baker, who actually spent most of his time being Doctor Who. So not only was he rehearsing and then filming, but he was always opening fates, doing things and what have you. And he virtually lived in the Doctor Who costumes, so they had to have several of them, really, to keep him going. And he was very charming to me. I was quite new, 1978. It was only my second year being there. I had a theatre background, and television, and especially filming, was quite difficult for me because I wasn't used to that kind of work. But he was very sweet, and we would talk, on a Monday morning he'd come in, I say, what have you done for the weekend? He'd have spent the whole weekend going to the cinema. He was an absolute addict of cinema, and living in his costume. So he was lovely. And we filmed in, and as I discovered, because I had to look it up, Edward Vale. My father worked in the steel industry in North Wales, and his very best friend and colleague was from Ebervale, very Welsh chap called Jack Evans. And when he heard that we were going there and the hotel that we were going to film in, use as the base, he said, that hotel's got a four-poster bed. So when I arrived and we were having the usual first evening drinks before checking into our rooms, I said to everybody, oh, I believe there's a four-poster bed in this hotel. And it was the room I got. It was, I could not believe it. I mean, I walked in and there was the four-poster bed. It was extraordinary. But we also filmed in the show caves in Wales. And these are the most extraordinary caves. And it was the first time I'd been to those kind of caves with stalactites and stalagmites and what have you. So all that was very exciting. The highest golf course in country, I think it is, the Welsh golf course. And we obviously did the sand pits, which is, everybody did the sand pits for Doctor Who. So that was that. But another interesting story, I think, is that we went to eat in a restaurant called the Walnut Tree, which I had to look it up. It was in Abergavenny. And a few years ago, it featured in one of the worst restaurants in the country and had to be turned around by whoever the man was doing that series. But when we went, it was really world class. It was in the middle of nowhere, but everyone knew about the Walnut Tree. And we got there, and as I said, I was quite new and young and on very little money, really, and looked at the menu, and I thought, I don't know. And I was sitting next to Tom Baker, and he said, well, what are you going to have? I said, well, I really would quite like oysters, but they're very expensive. I'll buy them for you, he said. So he bought my oysters, and he was lovely. It was phenomenal. I remember certain people, Bruce Purchase, who was this big giant of a man, but charming and gentle. And very sadly, and I just saw the name, but it's not on the IMDb cast list, Adam Kurikin, who died very young. And I do remember that he complained about a pain in his leg or something, and then I think it was cancer or something. So I remember that was terribly sad, really. But also Pennant Roberts, who died tragically young as the director, who was simply lovely. And one of the jobs as an AFM was driving the director and key crew to location, or key cast or what have you. I was driving. I didn't have a clue where I was going. The signs were all in Welsh. Pennant made this joke about the fact that the English couldn't speak Welsh. So he was lovely to work with. It is one of the experiences of my life, really. So yeah, did enjoy it.
So would you have done all of the location side of things before getting to studio?
Yes. You always did the filmings. Yes, as far as I remember, because I did. Some others do have Angels and one other, which I really can't remember. And I think we did always do film inserts before the studio. Yes, we did. Because, of course, studio then, you'd go into the studio, you rehearse all day, and then it was like it had been when it was live television. You'd go for your supper break, the set would get reset, and then at 7:30, we'd go as if we were recording to an audience, because it came from the days of audience shows. And then VT would drop in the film inserts as you were doing it. That's my memory anyway.
So having been away, quite away from London, it must have really bonded the cast and crew before you got into studio, which must have been helpful.
It is. It was quite difficult as a young and especially woman in those days, because the only other women generally were makeup and costume, and obviously in the cast, but it was predominantly a male cast. So it was quite difficult for a young woman. I'd gone straight from home to drama school to theatre, where I'd been in London, based in London, going to London theatre. So suddenly, oh yes, you're going away for 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever. Very exciting. I'd kill to be doing it again, really, in different circumstances. But it was, yes, you did bond in a way that was quite extraordinary. But that was something else about the BBC that was so fantastic before Produced Choice, because we all worked with everybody. And all the departments, although we were not in the same buildings, you did really get to know everybody. And one of the things that struck me the most, because I did a lot of theatre in television, I did Play of the Month. with the most wonderful director, Don Taylor, you'd have your technical meetings, and there'd be the designer, the set designer, the costume makeup, all the technical crew and everybody. And you'd sit there and the designer would have drawn a set. And the lighting man would go, well, you know, I think we need to cut a bit of the roof off there because I won't be able to get the lighting in. And then the chief cameraman would go, well, actually, how am I going to get the camera through that door? It needs to be made wider. The collaboration was extraordinary. And then the lighting man would say to the costume designer, what color are your dresses going to be? Because I want to make sure the gels match and that kind of stuff. And, you know, they would just, I would sit there in awe with some of the people. They were phenomenal, really. It was great.
And talking of, I think, very special people, would you come across Douglas Adams on Doctor Who? Because that was his first Doctor Who script.
Not that I remember, to be honest. No. No, I think as an airfare, I was just far too busy with, you know, there was a lot of administration. You have to remember we had no computers, so everything was done by hand. Absolutely everything. Not only was everything done by hand, but every phone call when you were away was done with pockets fulls of money. So, no, I can't help you out on that one, really. I've got a good pocket full of money story, though, on one film. We filmed in St Ives, a 1930s film, beautiful film. And basically, we had a big scene with hundreds of extras all dressed in 1930s clothes. And the weather was terrible. So we had to cancel the whole thing. And we're talking about 200 people probably. And me and another AFM at the time had to go and sit in a call box with bags full of 10p's that night to recall them all for the next day or the day after or whatever. I mean, you know, it was fun. It was great fun, really. Loved it. Absolutely loved it.
So having started off in theatre, did that particularly prepare you for television, or was it just such a contrast?
No, I was a complete snob. So my first role, in fact, I'd worked in theatre, and then I thought, I'd quite like to work in television, and I'd applied to be a floor assistant, and a floor assistant really is a gopher, or like a call girl boy, where literally your job is to get people from costume and makeup onto the set, and back again and what have you, and you can work across all genres. So it was in a department called studio management. And I'd come from theatre and, you know, running the book and running the corner and all that kind of stuff. And here I was, all I was doing was kind of, oh, would you like to come to makeup now? Would you like to? And I just didn't like it much. I did Playschool. I did a fantastic book programme with Melvyn Bragg, with David Niven. I can't think of his book. I've got the book. Wonderful book, and he was so lovely. But the thing about Television Centre was it is the donut, and I was really very new, and I had to get David Niven from basement makeup to the studio on the ground floor. We went around the whole donut. He was so sweet. He said, "You've got lost, haven't you?" And I, you know, you weren't allowed to say that. And I said, "Yes." So he said, "Right, we'll start from here, and then we'll keep working round." And he was just charming. But mostly I did do a couple of pops, that was exciting, but I really didn't like it. I wasn't very good at it. I didn't behave very well. So my 4-month contract came to an end, and I was about to be shown the door, and 2 days before there was a drama with the very wonderful Mark Shivas as producer. I think it was Mark, not Richard Eyre, called The Saturday Party, which was... again, one of those dramas in the studio and then on location, and they needed a second AFM because they were so busy. And I got put onto that as a trainee, and I just loved it. And the designer thought I was wonderful, and everyone thought, so I got the most amazing, I've still got the write-up. So I got kept on. And then I went from contract to contract, which is another thing the BBC did, was you went from contract to contract. And then it came, I can't remember, but I didn't get another contract, and I did have to leave. And the funny thing was, I applied to British Airways because I thought, well, British Airways, BBC, kind of similar thing. And I applied to be when you get people from the waiting room to the plane. I forgot what it's called. And I literally, the day I got a letter to say I'd got the job, I got a phone call from the BBC to say, would you like to come work for us? And it was like, oh yeah, okay, I'll go back to the BBC. And then worked my way through. And from then on, I did mostly plays for a while, which I just love. Play of the Month with Don Taylor, who was a fantastic director. Did a play called The Critic, which was 18th century restoration comedy, which was just fantastic. We had the Academy of Ancient Music Orchestra there. The whole set, Barry Newbury, wonderful designer, had recreated a theatre of the time with the sides coming in, with the lights being candles where it turned and turned back. So I worked my way up from that, and then I was location manager, going out on location. But one story I did tell you, which I do think is very funny, if you don't mind, The Crucible. So The Crucible, and Don Taylor's way of rehearsing was to rehearse absolutely in order, scene by scene by scene, from day one of rehearsals up at Northampton rehearsal rooms. And it was the most incredible cast. Eric Porter, Peter Vaughn, Daniel Massey, just fantastic. And Eric Porter wasn't available for 2 weeks. So Don Taylor just said, I know Ruth can play Eric Porter. So I'm 5 foot tall, and everyone else was 6 foot and very experienced actors. And there was me with my book kind of having to read in these lines. It was just lovely. And I did love that. So then I went on to be a location manager, and location managing was absolutely my forte because, you know, you were out in the field. But again, you did it by yourself. You had no assistant. It was quite a tricky time. It was the time of Susie Lamplugh disappearing, the estate agent who, you know, so we, you know, us women were out there in the middle of nowhere, often looking for locations. I think we just started to get phones. Possibly the brick phone, but maybe not. So, and you'd be driving around trying to find the locations. And I mean, some of the doors, you just knock on a door and you go, oh yes, hello, until you set up a location. And one of my absolute favourite was called The Silent Twins, which was set in Wales again. And that was the story of 2 twins, identical twins. Family was from Barbados. And the father had come over to Devon originally in the RAF and then transferred to RAF Broady in Pembrokeshire. And his wife worked in the hospital, and they had 4 children altogether, and the 2 girls wouldn't speak. And they were identified as having tongue tie, which is where the thing under your tongue hasn't moved, so you can't speak. Anyway, long and short of it is they became arsonists, and they ended up in Broadmoor. And we did that film, and I was in Pembrokeshire from February through to May, and I started in February on my own looking for locations. Stayed in a wonderful hotel where I made great friends, still do. It was thick snow, and you're driving around all these Welsh countryside and what have you. And it was, but then by the time we filmed, it was high summer, spring. Fabulous film to do. Great memories, you know, you're staying with the crew. You get to know them all really, really well. And one of the other things that I like, and Richard Eyre wrote about it in his book, one of the lovely things about theatre and film and television is that it's often full of very outgoing people. But the great thing is it finishes and you move on, which is quite an interesting phenomenon. So you work very closely with people for 3 months, and then it's bye, and you're on to the next. So, you know, nothing gets stale. So, and I go back to Pembrokeshire every year now, almost every year, to the same area, because it is the most beautiful place to go. So from location manager to first assistant director, where you're basically running the floor, as you know, and you know, like a stage manager in theatre, really, and then to associate producer. And that, I worked on some fantastic productions, but it all got to a bit too much office space for me. And originally, when I started as an associate producer in television, you'd get the script from inception, do the budget, work with the producer, director, with the producer, then the director, with the casting, the money, the crewing, the locations, and you took it all the way through to broadcast. And for me, that was fantastic, because you'd be in the cutting room afterwards, then the music recording studio, which was heaven because I love music, and then right to seeing it going on television. And that was amazing. And then slowly but surely with Producer Choice, instead of using the in-house facilities, we started having to use the outside facilities, and sometimes they weren't very good. They actually cost a lot more in real terms, because you could always get an extra bit cut or an extra drop in or an extra something with your in-house, which you couldn't do outside. And the writing was on the wall, really. And my last production was massive. It was a First World War, huge budget, supposed to be set in the place in Norfolk where the Queen goes. My brain's totally gone. Oh, isn't that terrible? Anyway, the Queen's the place where she had is in Norfolk, and it was Spain instead of Gallipoli. And it was massive. And the producer, Gareth Neen, was wonderful. But I wasn't dealing with it very well. And the budget was kind of cut to the bone. And it was a lot of freelance people. I didn't function very well. I admit that. Hands on the table, cards on the table. So, and they were offering redundancy, which is why I left. But I just want to do one more story, because I know you're going to do Broken Glass. So I'm a single mother, and when possible, my then au pair or nanny would bring my son to studio to see me, because otherwise I didn't see him. And Broken Glass, Mandy Patinkin, who is known for some hospital series in America, which I don't know because I never watch it, and Homelands. Absolutely wonderful man. And he was brought in for the money. So the lead actress was the David Thacker's wife. And we had, this is so terrible the way my brain goes, because I can see the people so well, but the American were putting money into it, so they wanted, so that we had Mandy Patinkin. It was absolutely lovely. Elizabeth McGovern was in it as well. And we were filming at Ealing Film Studios, and my nanny brought my son in. He was about 5, I think it was. And Mandy went up to him and said, "Oh, who do you belong to?" Which is actually a really Jewish thing that people say. It's kind of on the kibbutz, people say, "Whose are you?" It's quite an interesting little thing that we do. Anyway, so who's up? So Jack said, and he said, "Who's your father?" And Jack said, "Well, I haven't got a father. My mother is Ruth." And Mandy said, "Well, you don't need a father then." Which I thought was quite nice, really. So that was very nice. But that was an extraordinary production. So yeah, no, I did work with incredible people, and still, you know, even if you don't see them, you know about them from across all sorts of media and that kind of stuff. So it was fantastic.
Am I right in thinking that during your time at the BBC, you encountered Arthur Miller during rehearsals?
Yeah, well, I was very lucky. So I did 2 productions of his. One was The Crucible, where we didn't meet because he didn't come over for that. He would phone in occasionally and that kind of thing. But we did do Broken Glass. We made Broken Glass as a film, and then we took it to New York to celebrate his 80th birthday, I think it was. And while we were there, we did an interview with him. And that was quite funny, because my job was to kind of find flowers. And it was before we had flower shops here like we did there. Flower shops were unbelievable. And, you know, I was suddenly, because I was in New York, it was the producer, the director, and I think that was all personnel. I think the executive producer, Simon Curtis, couldn't come because he was very busy. So he said, "Oh, you can go." So, well, yes, I'll go. That's fine. I've always adored Arthur Miller. I think he's, you know, every play that he's written, I think he's extraordinary. So, yes, he was just charming. He was everything, you know, I thought he would be. So that was it. But I will tell you, there's a really funny story about that, because when we got to New York, Bill Clinton was in town. It was some conference, and every single room in the hospital, in the hotel, in the city had been booked out. And Simon Curtis' assistant had let them know that I was on the late plane and I was going to be arriving late, but it took a very long time for me to get from the airport to the city. When I got to the hotel, they'd sold my room. And the producer Again, my brain, it's so terrible. But the producer, that's fine, she can share with me. Well, you didn't do that sort of thing, but it was really quite fun. So we shared the room because there was no alternative. So yeah, so that was my Arthur Miller meeting, really.
And having started out in theatre and worked in plays at the BBC, was there an element that it did feel theatrical on television, or was it more the text that was the only sort of theatrical side?
Well, because I'd done English A level and theatre was my thing, really. One of the things for me, which I know the film people didn't like, was I loved rehearsals. I loved doing rehearsals. I loved sitting on the book. I loved prompting actors. I had a real empathy for doing that, I have to say. And it was one of the things that was there. And watching, David Jones directing and Jack Gold directing and some of the most amazing actors and me sitting there and being able to prompt them and help them in, I would spend extra time with them. So I absolutely loved that. And I loved the way we did it in rehearsals and in the studio. And as I say, this combination of the talent across the board of all those sort of people. Moving out to film, I did enjoy film, but I did, you started to find that there were directors who actually didn't know how to cut anything. So Jack Gold would do a ratio of 2:1. So, 2 foot of film for every one shot in the camera or 2 lots of film. I was suddenly working with directors who would do a ratio of 22:1 because they simply didn't have a clue. And they would the film would go through the gate and also, so yes, I mean, I for me, the theatre television element of it was fantastic. And I was very lucky at the time. Play for Today, Play of the Month were the flagship of BBC drama. Then as I moved into films, yes, I did get very excited by a lot of the films. And one of the most exciting things, I think, the projects, and I was lucky enough, I think I did 5, Simon Curtis, executive producer, something called Performance. And that was theatre directors doing a film for the first time, or film or television. So you had David Thacker, you had Katie Mitchell, and a few others. There was one who was a bit of a disaster, and I really can't remember his name, but in the cast were Kenneth Branagh and Stephen Ray. And I mean, they were just so fantastic. And Kenneth Branagh, I remember the producer saying, "Oh, you must get him a taxi, and hire a car or chauffeur-driven car or whatever." So I went to him and I said, "Oh, what time would you like your car?" He said, I can afford my own car, don't be silly. And then you'd have people at a much lower level than him who would go, "Well, where's my car?" He was just, I think Kenneth Branagh is one of our, just fantastic.
So would I be right in thinking you also worked with Omar Sharif?
I did a film with Omar Sharif, a studio with Omar Sharif and Jeanne Moreau. So Jeanne Moreau, French actress, very famous, and Omar Sharif, obviously yes. So I was I AFM on that? So I was, on the very first day, I was told to go and ask Omar where he'd like to eat. And we were filming in the North Acton rehearsal room. So I go up and I go, "Excuse me, Mr. Sharif." He said, "Oh, call me Omar." I said, "Where would you like to eat?" So he said, "Well, where are you eating?" I said, "In the canteen." He said, "Well, then I'm eating in the canteen." And then every evening he would invite any of us that were available, because he was quite a lonely person living in a hotel which he didn't like. And his whole thing was he loved going, the horses in Paris where he lived and gambling and all. Not gambling as in, but, backgammon. He was famous for it. He would invite us all out to eat. So I went to eat in the most extraordinary restaurants all over London with Terence Stamp and goodness knows who else. But Jeanne Moreau was very sweet. Her mother lived in Peterborough. And she came up to me, I think it was the first or second weekend, and she said, "Darling, I need to borrow us a car," because they were not allowed to use the car except for coming to rehearsals. So I said, "Well, I'm not really." I said, I want to go visit my mother because I'm going to buy her a colour television, which goes to show how long ago that was. So I go, "Oh, all right then." So she was so sweet. So she used the car for the weekend and bought her mother a colour television. And when the film came to finish, she bought me, not as a bride, but as a present, the most beautiful pair of earrings, absolutely exquisite pair of earrings that she bought from Shepherd's Market in London. But I worked with him twice and her once, and they were lovely. They chain smoked. and you weren't allowed to smoke in the studios then. So we had to hire additional, I think it was a costume dresser each, to literally be there with the ashtray, so that they'd do their scene and then they'd come behind the flats and then have a quick puff and then cruise out. So yeah, you see, there's so many stories. It just conjures it all up, really.
Well, I think on the mention of some fantastic people to work with and very successful and I think lavish production, I think it's a lovely note to end on, Ruth. I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time. I'm sure we could talk a lot more about some of the other jobs you've done as well, but thank you.
Okay, thank you.